the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A state of control.
This is A State of Control, episode number 7, recorded Monday, October 7th, 2013. The red button or blue? Welcome to A State of Control. This is the podcast put on to you by the fine folks of AVNation about the control and automation segment of the AV industry. Welcome. My name is Tom Albright. I'm your host. With us, as always, is Steve Greenblatt. Steve is the owner, operator, and chief everything at Control Concepts. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Also with us from the opposite end of the country, Rich Fregosa from FregosaDesign.com. How are you, sir?
I am doing fantastic. Happy Monday from the left coast.
Yes. Is it technically Monday there already?
Well, for us, not really. We're kind of sidling into it. I get a couple of tasty waves, some cool brews. Everything's just saucy, man.
We record this at roughly 12, Eastern, so it's still dark in California. Not really. Mike Faulkner is here. He's from Avitecture, the manager of engineering services. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, Saben Shawhan. He is the senior AV systems consultant at Metropolitan Acoustics. Welcome, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me.
This month on A State of Control, we're going to talk about something that I am, all of us are familiar with, and me being a pseudo end user. I'm a technology manager at a college outside of St. Louis, and that is the price of programming, specifically the price of good programming. Because, well, let's be honest, you can have bad programming, and almost like McDonald's, you can get, an extra size fry with that when it comes to programming. But let's talk about good programming and not talk about bad ones. Guys, when it comes to, programming is, you can't touch it and feel it. Yes, you get a flash drive or a CD at the end of the project, and I'm not going to get into the whole who owns the code on this episode, but you get some sort of version of the code in some way, shape, or form, hopefully, that is yours physically. But the actual thing, the actual programming, it's ones and zeros. It's a bunch of muckety-muck if you don't really know what you're looking at. So it's kind of ethereal, right? It's like consulting. You don't get an actual piece of gear, and so putting a price on that actual programming experience is somewhat difficult sometimes, especially from the point of view of the end user. Steve, we'll kick it off with you here. Let's talk about budgets first, because that's a lot of times where the consultants and the end user will begin. How do you budget this? How do you budget programming?
When I was thinking about this topic, and I think it's something that when we get into it, we'll realize that we can all relate to it in one form or another. It made me think back to the show where we discussed the scope of work, and I think that's really the key item here is developing a scope of work and having a price correlated with it, and having those two really go hand in hand. And really the scope of work, when we talk about it in this sense, has to do with what you want the system to do. And I think the idea that there are many options out there, and of course budgets are not open-ended, but educating the user on what they can have, or maybe even telling them what would be best for them, would hopefully be the starting point to be able to assess the amount of work and putting a price on something. But essentially what we need to start to think about and have a conversation about in the beginning of the project is how do we match the needs and the costs, and also not fall into a situation where the customer is making a poor decision and limiting what they're getting and not necessarily being satisfied in the end.
And that's part of your job, though, as the programmer automation consultant part is making sure that is listening to them, but making sure that they understand what they're asking for, right?
Yes, for sure. The conversation really has to be a back and forth, and many times it gets uncomfortable because the customer sometimes thinks that you're challenging them, but what we're really making them do is think things through, because what they ask for isn't necessarily what's best for them, and sometimes they don't realize the impact of what they're asking for.
Let's take a look at this from two different angles, one more residential and one more commercial, because those processes tend to be, at least, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, seem to me to be a little bit different because the structure is different. Typically in a commercial or pro AV space, you're going to have a consultant or someone who is the advocate for the end user. In residential, primarily, the end user is the advocate for the end user. You might have a interior designer or somebody like that. So, Rich, we'll kick it off with you for the residential side. When it comes to talking about the programming and the costs, is this where do you walk them through, like Steve said, or do you, I don't want to say hide, but do you kind of build that in to the cost of everything else?
I think that programming, unlike hardware, like we keep talking about, is you can't necessarily touch it. But I've always believed that you can touch it, and really what you're working on is trying to find the connection with the human interface experience. That is where we're able to actually say this is the difference in terms of operational mode A as opposed to B as opposed to C. Now in residential, you're dealing with style, you're dealing with interiors, you're dealing with personal preferences, you're dealing with somebody that if it's their home, it is an extension of them, of their personality. So we're tapping into something a little bit different than necessarily a boardroom or a classroom or a series of training suites. And that's always understood. But I've always felt that, again, good programming should be almost as ubiquitous as that light switch. You just make assumptions when you see something on a touch panel, and we should be able to deliver it that way. And so, in terms of creating that value, I've always taken a backwards approach, and I think that a lot of companies who are software developers who focus on that look and say, like Steve was saying, let's focus on what you really say you want. You say you want X, or you say you want Y. Here is an example of what Y looks like, or here's an example of what X looks like. Let's get a feel for where you may be in that position. What winds up happening is if there isn't any value or buy-in created by whoever the deciding parties are, it is just that extra number. And that's where people feel that they're being challenged or treated as if, well, you really don't know what you want, so I'm going to tell you what you want. And it winds up being this back and forth where we're trying to sell the the undercoating on the car.
Yeah, or the extended warranty.
Yeah, and there is that discomfort, I think, when you're dealing with people who may be technically savvy to a degree, but when you toss the word programming out, they start to go into a little bit of a cold sweat because they don't necessarily want to tell you, I don't understand, or spend the time with me. What might happen is that there's a little bit of pushback just because they don't necessarily want to feel as if leverage is being given away. So the first thing that they go after is potentially devaluing what you do. It's a really fine line to walk. So again, where we go back to is I actually go to the other side of it, which is the human element. It's all of the visceral effects. What does it look like? How does it feel when you go from here? What is it that you feel that, if you were to use it in a perfect world, how can we make this work for you? At that point, then we quantify and we say, great, based on all of these things, which is how you're hoping to use it during the course of a day, these are the specific components that fit into that. And here's how some of them look. Maybe you like that. Maybe you don't like that. And it's funny is that I years and years and years ago, one of the silliest things that I ever went to was like a Dale's Carnegie sales training. And it has proven to be one of the most spectacular sales tools for me, because all it ever taught me to do was to spot objections that people would have before they voice their objections. And good programmers, we already know what they're going to be objecting to. We already, because we've done it so many times, and it's the same ones that keep cropping up. And what I found by creating value and where you can actually leverage it and move forward is to say the words for them. I know potentially that your costs, fears go along this way. Let me explain why this costs what it does. Indulge me for 30 seconds. Bang, bang, bang. Here are some of the things that we've done for other people. Bang, bang, bang. And then what happens at that point is you truly, hopefully, wind up creating a partnership with the people that you're working with. And then all of a sudden they start to understand, and the trust word starts to come out. Because again, at that point, depending on how it's sold, again, I'm the primary contact with my client. Mm-hmm. I also happen to be the primary programmer. So I bridge both sides. Now, in a commercial setting, you may have salespeople, you may have project managers, you may have 3 layers before you get to the programmer. So what has to happen is then you have to form a bit of a philosophy and a bit of a procedure and your message from the salesperson to the programmer as to how they're delivering it. And so in Resi, it's a little bit easier because we all tend to wear a couple of different hats and we all tend to have direct relationships with the end user. In commercial, I know that it's a little bit different, but even in commercial, I've found that I've had success with it when I've spent the time identifying who really the key people using it, and the key people have to sell it to whoever else that they're reporting to. It's telling stories, as silly as it is.
Well, Saben, let's delve into the commercial side, the pro side of this. How does this process work? Because Rich is right. In residential, typically you're the programmer, you're the salesperson. In Rich's case, he's the owner. But in the more commercial world, he's right. You do have several layers to get through before you get from the client or the end user's vision down to the programmer.
Right, and so there's actually a couple things that I heard both of you discussing that I wanted to touch on. And one thing I found interesting was you talked about hiding. Do you hide the number? Do you build it in somewhere else? And in a commercial environment, I know what we've had success doing is it's not necessarily hiding it, but we don't talk to the end users about the pennies and cents. We deal with specific functions. It's a training room. It needs to accomplish these 10 things. Do you want 5 lighting presets? Do you want 3 lighting presets? Do you want one button that turns on everything in the room, or do you want one button that turns on the minimal, and then as you need it, it powers on the rest of the stuff? And we just list those things out very plainly, very simply. And then from there, as a consultant, we take that information and either develop a budget on our own, which for simpler rooms we can, or when they're more complicated where there's a very substantial amount of, I would say, above and beyond custom programming, stuff you don't see every day, then I would reach out to a certified independent programmer and say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Can you give me some feedback on hours and time and potential problems? And then we develop a number and we stick it into our budget that the end user sees. Now, the only people that see that number are usually the higher ups, the ones that Rich is talking about, where in a residential, his interface is writing the check. In my world, I'm talking to 10 people and none of them are writing the check. It goes up the food chain, and a manager to a CEO somewhere has to give the approval. So it is a different process. And to even elaborate on what you guys said about layers, I'd say there's even more layers than what you guys discussed. Not only is there a project manager and an account rep and possibly a programmer, that's just on the programming side. When you think of the layers of the entire project, usually the architects are on contract. The consultants are on contract with the architects or through the end users from time to time. So you have a whole layer there that needs to be dealt with. I'm reporting to an architect. The architect's reporting to a construction manager. The construction manager's reporting to an owner or a end user group, and all of that has to be navigated. And to be honest with you, it's extremely rare for the programmer to ever even see or touch base with the end user until the system's already purchased. And Steve's probably he's probably shaking his head on the other end of the call because, he's going after projects and pricing projects, and his only interface is me or somebody parallel to me, and he's got to cross his fingers and hope that we have taken the requirements from the end user and laid it out in a precise enough fashion that he can then price it accurately enough to develop it and deploy it. It's not an easy challenge.
Okay, Mike. So take what Saben said and what Rich has said. Saben made the point where he said, the guy who he talks to isn't even the person writing the check. That's difficult to get all of these different things passed along, I guess, or all the different the idea of programming passed through all these different layers. How then do we justify the cost of programming, whether it's built into the system or it's something that we talk about overtly? How do we get that past all of these different decision makers?
Well, I've got one more layer that I have to deal with on a regular basis, and that's the government or military. Yeah. So when we have to justify changes, we try to provide, first off, a working, usable system to the client, and then you also have to, well, what do they want it to do on the, like you said, the one button touch, and I don't know, it becomes a shell game. You're trying to explain to the guy, your main point of contact, well, okay, you want it to do this, do this, do this. That's fine. We've got that covered. But in walks his boss or, the general, and they don't want to touch a button. They want to walk in and it's got to, just read their mind and work, which
they've all been watching episode of 24.
Yeah. And my wife is still begging me to figure out the reading your mind module, and I just,
yeah, let me know when you get that build made, and I'll buy it off.
Oh, please. Billions I will make. So we sit down, toward the end of the project, and we say, okay, well, this is what we had budgeted, and this is what we've done so far. How close are we? And if they start, well, we were hoping to do this, 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 and this. If it gets past the budget, we look at them and we say, okay, well, this is really how long it's going to take us to do this. Are you up for a change order? I know that's, again, the 4-letter word, but we need to be able to pay for our time, and we need to justify how long it's going to take for something to happen. So I literally look at the client and say, it's going to take us this long. Are you sure you want to be able to do this? Yeah. And if they're, dead set intent on this function that they've come up with, we do the change order and provide it. But then there's also those silly times where the client's like, oh, I was really hoping that button would be green, not, blue. Okay, well, we can do that right away. Little things like that, not a big deal. I don't know. My biggest complaint is when you're looking at the scope of work, and I know we keep going back at the whole scope thing from the other episode,
but it works.
But when you read the scope of work that says the control system will control the system, what are we supposed to do? And I'm an integrator, and I see that from consultants.
That's because consultants sometimes are idiots.
Not all of us, but there are.
You said it.
No. But so seriously, I've seen real quickly. I've seen, and so help me if you do this. I'm not going to apologize because it's a crappy thing to do on a scope of work. The integrator is responsible for providing a complete working system, regardless of what this scope of work says. Yeah.
There's a lot of clauses. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of clauses like that floating around for sure. Yeah.
There's no buts about it. I have 2 proposals sitting on my desk right now that have that clause in there, and I've seen RJ45s coming off of display going into an audio input of another device and going that's never going to work, man. But
you haven't heard about the whole AVB, You're supposed to
With
read. That's
control.
supposed to be AVB and control all at once.
And control. Yeah.
It was the beta.
It was the
And it's no programming required according to the manufacturers.
according to of course.
Right. Yeah. No, you just click on it and it's fine. You
download
we have
the app.
To be able to come up with a price for this generic system, and then interact with the client with, again, a lot of times we don't see until we're buttoning everything up, and this random guy walks in and says, yeah, this is my room. Oh, really? How come I haven't talked to you? Well, I don't know. Well, what were you looking for it to do? Not this. Oh.
What's even better? Go ahead.
Well, that happens. Not only does it happen directly to integrator, but it happens to the consulting community as well. There are projects where I deal with a project manager, and that's my assigned contact. And we go to check out the room, and there's somebody standing right next to the integrator who says he's the end user. And why does the thing not fly backwards? And we designed it to fly forwards, and it's the same scenario.
What do you mean it won't make my coffee?
Yeah, right.
Because the coffee pot doesn't have a relay on it. All right.
It can.
It can. That would be awesome. Real quickly, guys. Steve, we'll kick this one off with you. There have been numerous advances in AMX, Crestron, or whoever you want to talk to. All of these companies are creating some really cool and wicked things, right? They're doing some really, really unique things, or at least giving us the opportunity to. Giving programmers and giving system designers the opportunity to, with the pieces, the actual boxes that they're making. However, if all you're looking for is a relay closure, and you've got this massive, Pro 2 or Pack 2 just to turn off one light, you're overkilling the system. But when it comes to really utilizing all the tools that the manufacturers are giving us, but then on the other side, you've got either the consultant or the end user saying, all I really want to pay for is X or Y. How do you not justify the cost of that, but how do you fully utilize the equipment that the manufacturers are giving us, while at the same time trying to maintain costs? I guess is the best way to ask that question.
Sure. It becomes a tough situation, actually, because a lot of times there's, of course, marketing that comes into play, and the control system manufacturers are out promoting their products, telling everybody of all the potential. And I think that all that potential is there, and the truth is we'd love to be able to provide it. What it comes down to, though, is trying to boil down as to what how that potential translates to this application, and knowing that you have the opportunity for advancement and add-on, and there can be more that we can do, but within the scope, I guess, or the baseline, this is what we're here to provide. And I think commenting on what was said earlier, I think it comes down to a lot of times relationships and understanding, having some sort of understanding of a starting point. This is really what we typically do, I guess, is a good way of putting it, and being able to, and I've worked together with Saben on projects, and we've taken the time before we've gotten into a project to understand what do we normally do for these types of situations, so that we can address the exceptions hopefully up front. But it's trying to define that baseline, and I guess when it comes to the manufacturers, they also have to understand that they can't be telling the customer about all these great things unless the customer realizes that they have to pay for those things. It just doesn't happen without programming.
I'd like to say perfect example is the all-encompassing room view, fusion, or the RMS.
Yep, that's perfect.
Exactly. The salesperson, the consultant says, yeah, they're going to have room view, or well, what did you want it to do?
And real quickly, Saben, RoomView, RMS, all these are asset management softwares.
Oh yeah, we know.
We I'm
know
just
well.
explaining for the anyone listening. That's
Audience.
what it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, okay, if you want to sell one of those packages, we have to find out exactly what they want to monitor, or are we doing scheduling? How many rooms are you doing the scheduling? And all of that plays into a massive cost increase when it comes to any of these systems. It does help out for the client in the long run over many years. They won't have to have somebody running around to all the different rooms, shutting them down, checking bulb life, all those little things. But when they find out that they have to pay extra per functionality, per room type, because again, not all of the rooms will have the same program. So if it's the same program in every room and all you're doing is making one modification and loading it up to 20 different rooms, that's one thing. But if all those 20 rooms have completely different room styles, room program, room everything,
equipment,
and then changing that and modifying to be able to put on one of those asset management softwares, it is very expensive. Not to mention what it costs to have the software itself.
Thank you for mentioning that, because that was going to be my next question to you.
Yeah,
you've got, and I don't mean to beat up on consultants. Saban's a very nice gentleman, but you've got, whether it's the end user saying I want to be able to do this, and someone along the chain of command not understanding exactly what they're asking for. If you say I want to be able to remotely monitor, I want some sort of asset management software, whether it's RMS or it's RoomView or it's whatever, they don't understand that there is a software package that you have to purchase. There is a purchase price. So all of these, whether yes, there are free versions, but those free versions stop at so many licenses. And so if you've got a decent sized building or a campus for a college, that those free licenses will run out relatively quickly. So,
basically, do nothing out of the box.
Yes, sort of.
Without the programming to back it up, right?
I think that at this point, every integrator should walk around with, the guy who issues the disclaimers at the end of the commercial. Because if you think about it, it almost feels like, sometimes what we're getting is you get that really flashy, beautiful car commercial, and they start talking about it starts at $19,999, and then the guy behind goes, model shown is, with X amount of values, and actually comes in at $74,000. They put that aside in right at the very end, which is you can have this, but it costs more.
Yes.
Right.
The sad part about it is, how do we ever get to doing all of these added features? And I mean, I was listening recently to one of the AV Week episodes where they were talking about near field, and I think that having that in the system would be wonderful. But how do we find the clients that would appreciate that, and where do we have that conversation?
You go to work for Fregosa. That's how. Rich gets to do cool. What was it? One time we were talking, Rich, and I asked you if you've ever controlled a waterfall, and you said yes.
Oh yeah, water slide.
It's just a relay.
Yeah, it's just a relay.
Exactly.
But the fact that you don't say it's just a relay—that's the thing. You say, "Oh yeah, I can control a swimming pool." Sure, absolutely. It's a waterfall.
And again, that's where the value comes from. And that's a good example, which is I'm delivering what you want, or I'm delivering some of the things that you say you want. And I think at times, even from the consulting standpoint and from the programming standpoint and all of these things, and not to get into, programmers are artists, man. This is what I do. This is my craft. It's more about, learning how to express what you do. And that's a very key point beyond the technical elements. And again, I'm kind of full of these analogies. You can go into a restaurant and the chef can tell you, hey, these are the 3 different ingredients that I used. I cooked this at 350 degrees for an hour and a half, and then I whisked this together, and I used this emulsion blender and put it, and your eyes kind of glaze over. At the same point, if the story is told differently, again, the same information, but the story is told differently about, we acquired this from here, and, this is what we've developed, and we found a unique way to, create this for you, that's what makes this special for you, you get a different buy-in. Sometimes it's just a matter of, since we're so data-driven, we sometimes forget how to deliver the data, as odd as it sounds. And, the argument is, well, that's the salesperson's job. Not really. If you're the one who is responsible for the end product, as the software developer, as a consultant, as any of these things, we're really in the solutions business at the end of the day. Every single time, we are there filling a need and providing a solution. Everything else, like one of the others was talking about, which was, do you want one button or do you want 3 buttons? Do you want 5 buttons? More importantly, here's why you would want 1 button as opposed to 5 buttons. Here's what we've experienced. At that point, then value and buy-in comes in differently. And that's where I feel it transcends, whether it's commercial, industrial, boardroom, classroom, or residential. It still is a matter of relating to your user. And then it's just the tools in our palette that fill the void.
Yeah, absolutely. You are listening to State of Control, by the way. That gentleman right there is Rich Fregosa. Also with us is Saben Shawhan, Mike Faulkner, and Steve Greenblatt. Moving on from taking that to not budgeting process, but yeah, budgeting process. There's no way around this. When it comes to value engineering, as the term has been used more than once, Mike, we'll start this off with you. How do you save programming from value engineering? Because when you've got X amount of dollars, and you're in a good spot because you're in the middle of the government stuff, and why whether
government doesn't have any money right now.
Yes, that government has never had any money. That's whether it was the sequester or the shutdown. Now the government never has any money, and yet we still buy things. So, but they do tend to value engineer. When it comes to programming, how do you save that from the big red pen?
I tend to lose a lot of arguments. That's
well, then
really
you don't save. We'll move on. How are you in business?
No, we practice what we preach when it comes to, okay, you want the system to do this, then we'll be able to take care of it for you, but it's going to cost this much money. When they want to start Xing things out, do you realize that you're going to lose functionality? And what functionality do you want to lose? And we put it in our scope of work, in our proposal. Client refused to have X, Y, and Z, so into which you're not going to have X, Y, and Z. And then that way, when they complain about not having it, when we get final sign-off, we can go back and say, oh, you really wanted that? Okay, we'll do a change order.
That dirty word again, change order.
Yep.
Yeah, the change order word. Well, and from the more commercial side and the consulting side, it's not just contractors that have to value engineer things. Almost every system we do doesn't get bid and purchased as version 1. It's version 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah.
And one thing that we've had to do, especially more recently as the economy has gotten a lot tighter, is that we've really had to spell these out in very plain, simplistic language. The system is going to do this, and we literally bullet points make list. And then when the red pen breaks out, we sit down with whoever that person may be that has the ability to make the decisions and say, here's where we are. It's not just about programming. We tie it into the whole package. So do you want to get rid of this function? And then we'll worry about moving the money around and listing both software and hardware accordingly. But you have to spell it out in very simplistic bullet points that they do understand, and let them make choices. It's all you can do.
I have had clients where they turned down having specific functions, and then when it came to the sign-off, if we didn't spell out saying it will not be able to do this, if we didn't say that, the client will come back and say, well, you didn't say it wouldn't. Well, what do you mean I didn't say I wouldn't? Well, it says here in the contract it'll do this, 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 and this. It didn't say that it wouldn't do that anymore, because my original bid went out. The people that put out the bids versus the people that are signing off on it aren't always the same people. So you had to spell it out.
Yeah, and we keep coming back to that same point. Sometimes the people making the decisions are not the end users, and that's never going to change, and that's not something that's in the control of any of us on this conversation. But what is in our control, and especially from my end, the consulting end, is we list it out literally, and our spec has literally bullet points when there's a whole section on control and a whole section on programming, and we bullet point every feature that the system needs to accomplish. And if it's not in that list, then the contractor and normally independent programmer are not on the hook for those features, and that's how we manage that.
So let me ask you this: when it comes to once the system has been completed and you guys are doing, whether it's a punch list or you're training the end user on how to use the system, if there's something missing, whether it's that is outside of that scope, outside of that original, whether it's a bid proposal or whatever, if there's something that is missing from the end user's point of view, how does that get resolved? Yes, it's a change order, and I understand that. But take me through that process. Does the process start with a conversation between the actual end user and someone in that organization, and then it comes out to you guys?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I wasn't really sure exactly who you were addressing, but
it was
I think
anybody.
Okay. Well, then go ahead, Mike.
All right. So what we tend to do, at least as a good practice, if you're having a conversation with the end user who says, no, I was really hoping it would do this, you write everything down, then send an email to that person, to the project manager, to the sales department, obviously with that person on there saying, this is our conversation, this is the requirements that you'd like to add, and is there somebody else that needs to approve this? This is how much it will cost. And make sure that there's something in writing to back everything up. If you don't do that, then the list grows. Scope creep is, the next 4-letter word in this industry that you got to cover.
And another thing to consider too is a lot of times as we go along, we try to be accommodating. And those little things, they're good to be able to provide, and we always try to figure those into the cost of the project, but they add up over time, and eventually you have to say, well, I can go this far, but I just can't get to the next step, and it's really hard for the customer to understand that, or whoever is your customer, until you show them all of the steps that you took to get to this point. And I think that's something that we've found to be an important part of the process, is to document even those that you're providing that are at no charge.
Well, I'm gonna spin this around back. I mean, the consultants took a little bit of a hit earlier. One thing that I see not happening when Mike was talking about protecting themselves is we get submittal documents from not only contractors but independent programmers where they'll show outstanding touch panel layouts, but the narrative that describes what's happening is very lacking. And so there is the one button thing, but it doesn't tell me what's going on. And then everybody approves this great looking panel with a 3-sentence description of what it's doing, and then the owner walks into the room and says, hey, why are these 5 things not happening on the one button push? And there's only so far we can back them up, being as the technical rep on the project. That's what was submitted. That's what everybody approved. You left it open. Yep. If you're committed to a number and you're committed to providing specific functionality, then it's also your responsibility to list that in your submittal documents. The consulting team can only go so far. Writing, and I've had this conversation with Steve, is writing really good control system specifications is one of the most difficult things that we do, because they're so intricate and there's so much detail there. You have to really think about every application. And so some of those things do get left out, and that happens. And the way that you could cover yourself is by outlining those in your documents to the end users or consultants.
At that point, and again, what's interesting is that I think at times software developers, programmers, third-party people don't give themselves enough credit. I think they also inadvertently fall into sometimes minimizing it, whether through outside forces or their own forces. They wind up sometimes minimizing what they do. And from my standpoint, I actually build into my design services the development process, which is just that we're talking about here, which is we are going to formulate point A to point B, the things that you do and that you don't want, and the narrative has to occur. Well, the narrative has to occur through the form of an interview or something, whether you're working even with the consultant at that point, because it's our responsibility as the programmer to deliver. It's also the responsibility of whoever's on the other side to be able to hit the mid-ground to say, I need to be able to speak clearly what I want, and I'm there to facilitate it for them. Guess what? Just like design development, when I'm doing specs, when I'm doing drawings, when I'm doing technical support, project management, acting as a client liaison or their digital concierge, there's a fee associated with that. And I think that what happens sometimes with programmers is because they get relegated to just the programming, I'm doing the air quotes here, it starts becoming a matter of being kind of an employee of the group as opposed to a member of the team. And it's a very fine line because, again, in commercial, you've got a lot of people involved. Residential, I think you do too. I mean, you've got the architect, you've got the general contractor, you've potentially got the interior designer, you've got associated trades, you've got everybody you got to play nice with at the same point. And I think sometimes it's an identity crisis from the software developer to be able to state clearly, this is what I do, this is why I'm here, and this is where I add value. And at that point, the experience that we provide, and that's the key word a lot of times when people ask. My rates are far from the least expensive in the industry. The reason why I think I get hired is not because of always the work that I perform, but the experience and the value of 25 years of blowing things up along the way and adding value to the process as a member of the team. And I think sometimes that's really what winds up happening with a lot of the third-party companies, that they let themselves get undervalued at that point instead of coming around and deciding this is what we offer. And sometimes if you already know that you're going into a situation where you're undervalued, you're going to pay for the privilege of being on that project. And I don't think any of us like to think that we operate in not-for-profit status, even when you're dealing with budgets and anything else. Really, the people who win in the budgets are the people who can voice their opinions and their value the strongest.
Okay, so let's go from. Here's the thing, guys. I'm looking at this from the end user and also from understanding, at least knowing Stephen and Rich as long as I have, trying to see it from their point of view too. How then do we say to the client as well as to all of these other people in the process, listen to me, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to be authoritarian here, but I'm asking you questions like Rich said in the very beginning. I'm not challenging you. I'm trying to get out of you what you want in the very beginning, so this costs as little as possible. Not I shouldn't say as little as possible, but so the costs don't balloon as this person and that person puts their 2 cents in, a week before the building is supposed to open or the week before the house is supposed to go back over to the owners. How does that happen? I guess is the best way to ask that. Steve, we'll kick off with you. How do you get everybody on the same page, or how do you get them in that conversation while everything's on paper and not as we're getting ready to turn the keys over?
Ideally, it would be great if, and basically I'm going to repeat some of what Rich said, if we could have that conversation and be able to have the exercise of scope development from a functionality standpoint. And when we've had that opportunity, when we've been given a direct connection to the actual users, which aren't necessarily the people who the contract is with or who purchased the system, when we can sit with the actual users and educate them and then interview and get the information and then return with some designs or even a demo. And I think that even sometimes putting this stuff on paper isn't good enough. They really have to see it and touch it and understand how it's going to operate. And we're going through this with a customer now. And we went through all of those stages. And even so, when we go to implement it, there are still things that are confusion or they didn't expect. And I think that there isn't an exact science, but I think a lot of it has to do with trust. And when it comes down to it, they have to understand that you are dedicated to giving them what they want, as long as they understand that sometimes it may cost a little bit more, or sometimes we may have to police the scope or give them a heads up that what they're asking for is a little bit beyond what you anticipated providing.
Saben, we'll kick this next question off with you. The process is something we've talked about a lot on this show, on this episode. It's a long process. I mean, let's say that you wanted to open a building, regardless of when you wanted to open it, you start the process now. You might get that building open in a year, 18 months possibly. The industry, not only the computer industry, but the AV industry as well, is moving at such a rapid pace that what you spec, whether you're the consultant and you're the best consultant in the world, what you spec now is probably, it's not going to be obsolete, but there will be other items and other things that come along in the next 6, 12, 9 months that surpasses it. There might be a giant leap forward. Who knows? There might be, you might be able to hook up an RJ45 straight from a display straight into a speaker, thanks to AVB. How do you protect against, or can you protect against that? And if you can, how do you protect against the advances of technology over the life of that project?
Well, it's a good question, and it's not an easy answer. A big part of that really derives from where's the money coming from, and depending on who's paying the bill, it really dictates to me how we can generate these bid documents. If it's a state or federal or a certain branch of the government funding, they want a hard, in concrete list of equipment, maybe even a list of equipment that includes multiple alternates. And once that document has been issued, that's the end of it. You're not changing anything unless you go through all of the paperwork and make a very strong case that honestly most of us don't want to have to go through. Now, if it's private money or it's a corporation, what we have had success doing is, rather than leaving the door open for changes, what we do is we delay the issue of the AV documents. So base contract will include conduit power, other infrastructure requirements, and then the AV package will be issued 6 months later. So you're now 6 months closer to the completion date so that we can take a final look at this and make sure that we have the most current products. And on that, you said you might have a TV that can connect to a speaker with an RJ45. If that thing comes out on a Tuesday, I'm not speccing it on Wednesday.
True.
I'm okay with having not a second generation, but I'm okay with having products that are tested and true rather than something that may still be a beta, even though they're not calling it a beta. Some manufacturers are worse than others about issuing stuff that's really not debugged. And when you're developing a spec for, say, 20 or 30 or 40 rooms for a corporate client, that's a very risky item you just put in there that says, I'm going to throw something in. Well, and, everybody likes to be current. I'll admit, we like to push the envelope and make sure the client has the most current products available. But I'm not going to do that unless I have seen, touched, felt, and made sure that this thing is correct and I feel comfortable with it. I'm not going to do it sight unseen. It's just too risky.
Agreed.
Okay, so we just kind of, and I understand the whole not wanting to be on the bleeding edge of technology. That I get and I understand, but we're okay with being third and fourth generations because by then, hopefully, the systems that we spec are a little bit more stable. Guys, we're gonna end this with one interesting question that kind of wraps up almost what we've been talking about the entire time. Sometimes you don't, whether it's the spec by the consultant or by whoever else, but the specs itself, sometimes they don't accurately or effectively document all of these all of these control issues, right? Whether it's the one button or the three buttons or the green button or the blue button. Saben, we'll start this with you, and then we'll go down the line for all four of you. What is the best process? What is the best practice for speccing a control system? Is it outlining every single thing, and maybe it's even with drawings or sketches of what the client expects to see? Or is it maybe a little bit more ethereal and this is what they'd like it to do. How does that? What is the best practice for speccing a control system?
Well, there's two things that can happen there. The first, and what everybody has reinforced in this conversation, is that it has to do with talking to the right person and the right user and getting the right information from the beginning. So let's assume for a moment that has happened and that whoever that person is, they have the right information. Something that we do, and it has come from time and from honestly from probably messing them up 10 years ago, is that we have a multi-step process. In the spec, it does list bullet point, simple language. We want it to do this. It has a Blu-ray. You must include all transport controls that are available on the remote. Okay, that's pretty easy for everybody to understand. But another item that we have is we have a pre-software completion meeting, and that normally includes the design consultant, the owner's rep, or hopefully end user, and the programmer. And at that meeting, we go over this submittal document, and everybody looks at each other and says, yes, this is what we want, or can we make these 4 or 5 changes? And then that becomes the final document. That marked up version is it. And like that, and that we don't have a new user who changes their mind. But that's what we do, and it has been developed from exactly what you said. It is we had to screw a few up to figure out how to fix them, and that's where we are now, and it's been successful recently.
Okay, Mike, for you guys, what is the best process for speccing a control system?
I happen to agree with Saben. I mean, if you have that conversation with the end user and reviewing, because you always start off with some type of template to provide them. This is what these functionality is going to do, and this is going to do this, and this is going to do this. Sometimes just asking simple questions, you find out that the client already had a control system on the other side of the country, and they're going to supply touch panel layouts. They're going to supply basic functionality for you of what they're expecting it to do. Just by looking at the old touch panel layout, you can see that, oh yeah, this is what they had. Believe it or not, it can change really drastically when you find out whether they select an input then a destination, or select a destination then an input, and that can rearrange a touch panel rather quickly and cause somebody to have to go back and redo. And you don't want that to happen. You want to do it up front as early as possible. Now, whether you get that time to do that, that's not always the case, but you have to allow for that to happen if you want it to be done right.
Well, that's very true. Rich, for you guys, and whether it's a residential client or a commercial client, when you're working with these folks, how do you advise them is the best way to put this down on paper?
I think that Saben and Mike hit a lot of the hot points. And again, not bashing consultants. As one of the first residential consultants in the company.
We want him on the show again. Come on, guys.
Honestly, and again, I think what it reinforces for me in these discussions, like I said, is valuing what you provide as a service and championing what you provide as a service. I don't use programming. I use software development. That is what I do. I use tools to develop an experience. I don't just program. I don't just sit and tap all day long. And I think, again, the problem at times is that we suffer from an identity crisis as an industry and this segment of the industry. And so part of my job is to educate everybody around me on what I do. Because at the end of the day, they don't necessarily know what I do. They know at the end that there's a touch panel and there's a button and there's a few other things. And Saben and Mike actually hit it on the head, is that it is a process, and it is continuing the process. So what do? Is I stay in communication. It's like you just said, asking, have you ever had a control system before? Yes or no? That completely changes the construct of how you operate and communicate with people. And really all we're talking about at this point and during this whole conversation is communication and clarity of communication. The software, the buttons, the end user, all of these things are the result of good communication. And often, like I said, we get caught up in the technical side of things with a Blu-ray player or a video conferencing unit or audio conferencing unit. It goes back to how can we efficiently get you from point A to point B. I think Mike was talking about, an input to a destination as opposed to a destination versus an input. Sometimes it's a matter of saying, you know what, you may not even know right now. Sometimes what we give people is the option. Now, there is a price associated with that, so you can either save some money by making a decision now, or we're going to give you some room to be able to be flexible with it, but that is something that during the cost of development we have to think about. At times, it's the most basic things that get overlooked when we're dealing with sophisticated systems. And like I said, once the software developer, the platform developer can say, we are here to take care of this for you, this is why we're hired in the first place, then you're championing the cause. And once you can establish that benchmark with whoever you're around, typically you can replicate that a lot faster. Now, sometimes in projects that, again, the commercial projects that you're changing in terms of the teams that you're dealing with. But I truly believe that the philosophy that you take into it is the most important part. And sometimes it's not a right fit. And that's the big thing that I keep hearing. Sometimes you need to be able to, as the developer, say, this just isn't a good fit, and I'm not adding value. And so I would much rather not deal with the, losing the lost opportunity costs on another project by trying to chase after something that it probably isn't going to work collectively the way that we all anticipate. You sometimes have to be able to look at a project and say a project works or a project doesn't work. And, again, that's another fine line. But as a business decision, that's the most important decision you have to make.
That's a really good point, and that's a really hard decision sometimes because you got to eat. So, you got
to eat, but you also want to make sure that you're not giving somebody your last $5 for them to eat chasing the project.
True, absolutely. Steve, we'll wrap it up with you. What's the best process here for documenting control systems or for speccing them?
For us, what we've found works is first to try to get to understand the audience and know how technical they are. What level can they have this conversation? And if they have a lot of experience, then hey, we can start digging in. But if this is something that's new, or they're sensitive about it, or they're just uncomfortable, then we really have to do some hand-holding and be gentle about it. And what we've found to be beneficial is not to start with a blank slate. Come to the table with an idea and start to talk about that idea, and hopefully it's the idea that you feel is going to work best or you're most comfortable providing, and start to then explain that. And many times they'll say, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and if you can really back what you're pitching, I think that you'll tend to get buy-in, but at least you have something to be able to mark up or to be able to use as a point of discussion, and from that meeting or exercise, you could then come away with what do I have to do next to get closer to it, and maybe one or two passes, you hopefully get to a point where you're providing what they're looking for and they're happy with it, and they know that they were involved in that development. They had a hand in it. They just weren't given something.
All right, very good. That'll be the last word for this episode of A State of Control. With us this month has been Saben Shawhan from the Metropolitan Acoustics. He is the Senior AV Systems and Consultant. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How can people find you or find Metropolitan Acoustics?
You can go to metro-acoustics.com, and all of our information is there, including my contact information.
Very good. Also with us is Mike Faulkner. He's the Manager of Engineering Services for Avitecture. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And how can people get a hold of you?
They can email me at mike.faulkner@avitecture.com.
Avitecture.com. Uncle Rich Fregosa from Fregosa Design. Thank you, sir.
Happy, and I didn't lose my marbles nearly as much this time.
You did not. Uncle Richie was on our weekly, our AV week this past Friday, and he lost his marbles over Kaleidoscape. So it was interesting. Let me just put it that way.
It's always good radio.
It is. How can people find you, sir?
You can find me at fregosadesign.com. You can find me on the interwebs, Twitter, Fregosa. You can also find me at cepro.com, where I just finished covering the CEDIA show with my trade show videos. And pretty much anytime you type in my name, something about me losing my marbles will show up in a Google search.
Indeed. Have you guys started talking about CES yet for CES Pro?
Yep. I will be again blog mobbing for our CES 2014. Just sent in my my badge application.
Oh, very good.
It'll be a good time.
It will
be a good time. No, good. I always enjoy getting the feedback from the consultant side and the development side, and so Saben and Mike definitely brought up a lot of great points that caused me not to lose my marbles and listen.
Yes. And last but not least, our ringleader for State of Control, Steve Greenblatt from Control Concepts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was another great show.
And how can people get a hold of you or Control Concepts?
We're at controlconcepts.net, and on social media, Twitter is at Steve Greenblatt, and many of the other platforms, same thing. So look forward to hearing from everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. If you would, please go by the website for this network, AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv, you'll find State of Control, our weekly show, AV Week, as well as a number of other specialty podcasts. We do one on education, live staging and events. We have a social media and marketing social show. So check that out if you would, please. AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. This has been A State of Control.